water. Now we have a dance of the commissioners. And we now have Ms. Bonafé on the minimum requirements for water reuse. So, Ms. Bonafé, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, President. Firstly, I want to take the opportunity to thank my shadow rapporteurs for their contribution to this important discussion that we've had over the past few months. I started with a figure. In 2017, the global water withdrawals were at around 6,000 cubic kilometers, something which is set to double by the end of the century. Obviously, we have a problem relating to global competition in the provision and use of our water resources. This has an effect on the economy, on communities, and on the ecosystems that these communities depend on. On the one hand, therefore, we've got an increase of water demand, but in the other, we've also got ever clearer effects of climate change, which make it very possible that we will face drought issues more often in the future. And the topic of how we can correctly and efficiently use our water is becoming more and more a topic that we have to deal with. This is a precious and scarce resource. Europe is not an arid continent, but security of water provision is of concern for at least half of the EU population at the moment. And apologies if I give you a few figures. Water scarcity is a problem that around 11%, at least 11% of the EU population are dealing with, and 17% of the EU territory is affected by water scarcity. Since 1980, the number of cases of drought in the EU have been increasing, and the episodes have been getting worse. This has caused costs in hundreds of millions of euros. The study that came out in 2017 showed very clearly the scale of the problem that we're dealing with, and this was highlighted by the Commission impact assessment. And this only looked, for example, if you just look at the Italian agricultural industry, there have been millions of euros of loss of income. Water scarcity is no longer just a problem for the South. Now instead it is a concern for the entire EU territory, and it is up to us now to find adequate solutions to this at EU level so that we can ensure EU citizen welfare is kept at a certain level and we can protect our environment. We have to extend the principles of the circular economy that we have been focusing on in Europe, and we have to apply this to water resources. Firstly, we have to look at water savings and reuse with specific legislation capable of creating the legislative stability we need to improve investments in this very important sector. We've already got the Water Framework Directive, which covers the reuse of urban wastewaters and says that that needs to be increased in order to improve our water resource use. However, we are lacking precise legislation and clear rules supporting the benefits of this activity. According to data from the European Commission, the potential reuse of water by 2025 is 6.6 billion meters cubed. As it stands at the moment, we're only saving 1.1 billion meters cubed. So these are really very impressive figures. It shows just the potential that we can achieve. It's for this reason that the regulation as proposed by the Commission has been very broadly supported, and we believe that this should include the idea of the circular economy. The Commission's proposal looks at using circular economy principles to obtain standardized levels for water reuse within the EU, at the same time ensuring, of course, food safety for EU citizens. In the MV committee, we shared the general outline of the Commission here, which made it clear what specific legislation was out there already, for example in Italy, France and Spain. However, as the Parliament, we believe that a few changes do need to be made in order to make this piece of legislation clearer. More specifically, on the definition, the roles and the various agents involved, as well as the risk management side of things. So, briefly, we believed that it was important that there was more precision relating to the operators involved in the reclamation of wastewater. For that reason, in addition to the treatment plant manager and the reclamation plant manager and end user, we believe that we also need to include the distribution system operator in the list and the operator responsible for accumulating the reclaimed water. We agree with the parameters outlaid by the Commission based on the JRC study, but we believe that a salmonella parameter needs to be added in order to ensure better food safety for European citizens. Particular attention also needs to be paid to awareness-raising measures which would highlight just how important it is for us to save water and how we can reuse wastewater without harming human or animal health. In the Parliament today, we will be closing the first reading of this text, and it will be up to the new Parliament to open negotiations on this as soon as possible and approve this important piece of legislation. Thank you.
Pour 3 minutes, normalement.
Honourable members, I would like first and foremost to thank Simona Bonafè and the shadow rapporteurs for the very hard work done on the proposal setting minimum requirements for water reuse. The European Parliament's work will be instrumental, it is very important, in taking this important dossier forward in the forthcoming negotiations. As Simona already mentioned, water is a very precious resource. It is indispensable for all of us, whether it's for industry, for agriculture and the many other uses. However, it is also an increasingly scarce resource. Today, 1/3 of the European Union territory already suffers from water stress all year round. As the summer of 2018 has dramatically shown, water stress is becoming a concern for many member states, even for those that are not usually associated with water scarcity, even member states that are not even associated with drought. These problems are likely to worsen, mainly due to climate change. Together with water savings and water efficiency measures, water reuse can play an important part in addressing such problems. Also, in the framework of the integrated water management policy. The proposal on water reuse, which we are debating today, promotes treated urban wastewater as a reliable alternative water supply for agricultural irrigation. It seeks to extend the life cycle of water, turning a waste product into a resource, and this fully in line with the circular economy concept that this Commission is actively promoting. The objective is to facilitate the uptake of water reuse for agricultural irrigation wherever this is relevant, wherever this is safe and wherever this is cost effective, in order to alleviate water stress whilst preserving the health of consumers and protecting the environment. Moreover, the setting of harmonised minimum parameters will facilitate the smooth functioning of the internal market for agricultural produce and create new business opportunities for operators and also for technology providers. The European Commission thanks the European Parliament for their engagement and for the swift progress made in the preparation of their opinion, and the European Commission looks forward to a fruitful discussion. Thank you, Madam President.
Madame Petir.
Thank you, Ms. Petir. You have the floor for 1 minute for the Agriculture Committee.
Gospođo predsjednice, gospodine povjereniče, cilj ovog zakonodavnog.
Thank you very much. The goal of this legislative proposal is to fill in a lacuna in the EU acquis. Water is our most valuable resource, but it is under increasing pressure due to human activities and also due to recent climate changes. Therefore, it is necessary to link wastewater treatment and its reuse in the implementation of various policies, such as the policy on circular economy. the scope of the originally proposed water reuse has been expanded, and it can now be used in other areas than agriculture. And as the reporter for the opinion of the Committee on Agriculture, I would like to remind you that farmers are already obliged to adhere to strict rules laid down in the General Food Law Regulation. So this regulation should ensure that farmers have access to reclaimed water from wastewater treatment systems, but it should not result in any additional cost.
Right, so let's begin the groups. So Mr. Gambus for the EPP. Yes, thank you, President and Commissioner.
Realizado en este informe y la buena colaboración que hemos tenido entre todos los ponentes alternativos. El reglamento que hoy votaremos no solo debe servir para avanzar en una gestión sostenible del agua, sino también para abordar un nuevo aspecto de la economía circular. Aunque el reglamento está limitado a los usos agrícolas del agua, debemos tener claro que la ampliación.
Veuillez m'excuser, monsieur, mais il semble qu'il n'y ait.
Apologies, there was a technical issue. It's now working. Go ahead. So the regulation, as I said, is limited to agricultural use of water. We should be clear that extending the use of reused water should go further, for example, to industry. And I'd like to highlight co-financing through a program for reuse in chemical industry in Tarragona. As the Commissioner rightly said, we should take into account that by 2030, half of the EU population will be suffering from water scarcity. So today, although in some member states this may not seem to be a problem, I would call on the Council to understand that what today affects those of us in the south of Europe will tomorrow affect all Europeans. So I think that in the future it's necessary for the Commission to look at changing what is today a regulation into a directive, so that we can look forward to the future and work ahead of problems. Thank you. We now have Ms. Ayala Sender for 1 minute. Yes, thank you, President. I'd like to give warm thanks to the rapporteur, Ms. Bonafé. She is an expert, and she did work on the circular economy, and here she's showing her expertise again in her work on water recycling. As regards Spain, we have been through a long history of water scarcity. We are the country with the highest level of water reuse, but we're also aware of how fragile we are and how much we need this regulation to be flexible, given that Spanish water basins are very diverse and have diverse needs. And for that reason, we thank Ms. Bonafé for her willingness to understand those needs. This instrument is going to be very important. We need that flexibility, but in any case, Mr. Vella, we also need a directive on contaminated land. When are we going to get a directive on contaminated soil? Water problems begin with soil. So when will that happen, Mr. Vella? Thank you for keeping to your time. 1 minute 30 to the ALDE from Mr. Hoytema.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner. Dear colleagues, this is a very important report indeed, and we have seen last summer fresh water is something we can't take for granted. In many parts of the EU, we had severe drought, so it's very interesting to look at alternatives to groundwater for irrigation. Now, reusing this water from urban water, this could be a very good approach. 6.6 billion cubic meters are available if we're willing to use it. I think it's very important that we establish good, clear criteria in order to ensure public health and food safety. And all of this under the umbrella of sustainability. It's very important that we reuse water and other resources. There are other impacts as well. There are already member states who have already reusing this water. So in the framework of the single market, it's important to have European rules on this. And the products from those member states demonstrate are already in supermarkets. And to avoid problems with public health and to improve competitiveness, we have to address this at a European level.
Rodriguez for 1 minute.
Ms. Senra Rodriguez for 1 minute for the GUE Group. Thank you, President. In principle, we're not against water reuse, but this Commission proposal raises a number of problems. Firstly, reclaiming water is going to be in the hands of private operators. As the Commissioner said, it's a new business opportunity, so they will be looking at their business interest and not our health. Such a sensitive activity needs to be in public hands, just like the whole of the rest of the water cycle. And secondly, it's acknowledged that not all reclaimed water will be able to be used to water crops. So my question is, the water that's not going to be used for specific crops but for other uses, how is it going to be guaranteed that that won't pollute the water table? And thirdly, I don't believe we can go on hiding our waste in rural areas. Everything goes into our water, our soils, or our air. And I think we need to work on a different model of development. Thank you. For the Greens, for 1 minute, Mr. Skrelj.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Vella, dear colleagues. First of all, allow me to thank Ms. Bonafé on an excellent report. Together with our joint efforts, we have achieved a good and balanced report. The reuse of water has an effect on our environment. With the misuse, we can bring into question the water renewal. I'm glad that this report recognizes these problems. Climate has a stronger effect on our environment. This also affects agricultural production, which can have the greatest interest from the reuse of water, especially on the islands. We must pay attention to certain contaminations of the soil and agricultural land. Microplastics is a big problem, as well as endocrine disruptors, which are sometimes found in used waters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Bonafé's report is a very important one because it provides concrete solutions to serious problems relating to water scarcity and increasing droughts in the EU. This phenomenon is particularly concerning, is down to climate change and is affecting many areas of the south of Europe, areas which are facing problems with water provision and water stress. Farmers are the first to pay the price for these crises when the irrigation systems dry up. I am very much in favour of increasing the use of good practice of using reused water and putting this reused water into irrigation. I am very firm, however, on the quality of this water. We need to ensure that we've got very high standards when it comes to micropollutants and plastics. We're going to be able to respond to this three-pronged challenge: protecting the environment, protecting animal health and human health, and protecting water health. Thank you.
Ms. Mellin, ENF, 1 minute. Thank you, President. This proposed regulation for reuse of used waters deals with a key subject for three main reasons. this fake news about water stress affecting a third of the territory actually is to do with poor management. We would prefer a whole water cycle approach, and this should have been done for a long time ago. The lack of water which is used to justify problems in the agricultural sector and bring in speculation is appalling. And sorry, madam. Thank you. Mr. Lees for 1 minute 30.
Colleagues, for very good reasons, drinking water has very strict rules attached to it. And I don't think you can use the same strict rules for every possible use of water. For that reason, I think it's a very good idea that we have this step-by-step approach. Water scarcity is a topic, not just in southern Europe. I come from an area where it rains quite a lot usually, and actually sometimes they say if you don't want to get sunburned during the summer, please come to my region. And so if you have 8 million residents, still we have to provide water for them. But last summer, we almost completely emptied all of our resources in my region. So those people who say, well, in my country, water shortage will never be a problem, well, I think you ought to be rather careful. We're in the midst of climate change, and I think you're going to have to accept the fact that we have to be very careful with this very precious resource. I think this is a good approach. The EPP would like to have a directive, not a regulation, in order to address the wishes of member states in a more flexible fashion. But essentially, I think that for water used for irrigation, we should have good proportional rules, but perhaps not as strict as for drinking water. Thank you very much, and the EPP will support this text.
Thank you very much. For 1 minute now, Ms. Charbot.
Thank you. Deficitul de apă afectează 11% din populație.
The lack of water affects 11% of the European population and 17% of our territory. Rational water use is crucial because we need water to produce food, energy, and consumer goods. To protect this good, we need to find appropriate solutions at the European level. The Water Framework Directive mentions the reuse of urban wastewater as a supplementary measure for effective use of resources, but this hasn't been sufficiently exploited because we don't have the right legislation in place. Unfortunately, the Commission's proposals only talks about water reuse in agriculture. It's important also to talk about reuse of treated water with harmonized criteria at European level for the reuse of urban wastewater.
Ms. Avey, 2 minutes.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. The EU territory is subject to water stress because of human activity and climate change. In 2003, drought caused at least 8.7 billion euros of damage to the EU economy, and the number of people affected by drought has increased by 20% in recent years. Total costs have reached the astronomical cost of hundreds of billions of euros. Not only, as our colleagues have said, is this happening in dry seasons in Mediterranean countries, We've got a very extreme situation now, which means that climate change is affecting more and more people in North Europe as well. Water is a common good and a precious resource and should therefore be managed in an efficient manner. Our water resources should become a priority for us at all levels. For this reason, we have to ensure that the use of water in a circular economy is adopted. This is a very positive thing, and water should be used as a resource that should not be wasted in Europe. We need to have minimum standards for reused water, and we have to guarantee that the use of it is safe. We should never run any risk for our soils and for our crops. The use of microplastics and various endocrine disruptors they do not belong in our soil. These need to be absent from our water, whether that be seas or rivers, and we need to ensure that we can do away with these forever. Our standards need to be in place to promote biodiversity, and the reclaimed water in this regulation should play a role in that. Finally, I wanted to mention the toxic substances that can end up in our water. We need to ensure that toxic substances do not get into our soil and therefore get into the food chain. I'd like to very much thank the rapporteur and the shadow rapporteurs for this very important regulation. We need to ensure that we do use water well and that we do not run a risk for our environment. Thank you very much. Mr. Lancini, 1 minute. Thank you very much. We need to act to protect the climate and our citizens. We need to leave behind a cleaner world for future generations, but this needs to be done with weighted long-term solutions. We need to ensure that we've not got a witch hunt here, and we have to not affect the competitiveness of our businesses. The EU is facing water stress, and the reuse of water is obviously not going to resolve all of our problems, but it will be a first step in the right direction. If we can get to reuse of water of 6.6 billion cubic meters per year by 2025, that would be excellent. We need additional measures, however, in order to ensure sustainability for the future and to avoid extra serious costs for farmers and the agricultural industry. We have to ensure that we have the same rules for all countries and harmonized criteria at EU level. We need to ensure safety and security for our citizens in reuse of water. Thank you very much.
Madame Delahaye, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Ms. Delahaye, 1 minute, please.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, dear colleagues. As part of the circular economy approach, this is a very important report, and I'd like to thank Ms. Bonafé and my colleagues for the work. Beyond the issue of transparency and responsibility, the need to keep up with research and innovation, I want to mention something very important. The health of our crops should not be affected by the quality of reclaimed, reused water. To ensure effective use of urban wastewater which has been reclaimed, we need to inform farmers so that they use this water in the optimum way on their crops so that they don't have an effect on their health. It's also important for consumers to accept reuse in the food chain, so safety and information to those involved is a key aspect for me, and I thank the rapporteur for taking those into account.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to the Catch the Eye procedure. I'd like to pass the floor to Mr. Fire. Please, could you speak a little more slowly this time?
Madame la Présidente. Desde 2008.
Thank you, Commissioner. Since 2008, the European Parliament said that we need to deal with this issue. Beyond the circular economy, we need to come back to this issue. Water resources are a key area for the Commission. Water reuse for crops has to respect the environment and human and animal health. So reused water cannot lead to eutrophisation of soils or reduction of water tables or any other disruption of the environment as a result of biodiversity. The role of competent authorities along with end users, they have to work together to ensure that this works. We also need to renew facilities and infrastructure through investment. Thank you very much.
On a perdu Monsieur Marias, donc je vais.
Well, I'll now pass the floor to Mr. Kelly, please.
While water itself is cyclical in its formation, that is, it falls from the sky, flows into the sea, evaporates, vaporises and falls again, it is not an infinite resource. And we have seen instances of drought from Australia, indeed to my own country, which is renowned as a place where a lot of rain falls. Last summer, water had to be rationed. And while at the same time, in places like Dublin, up to 50% of our piped water is leaking. And this is something that is being addressed, but will take some time to address in the future. That's why the reuse of water, where practical, is so important. And I welcome the proposals here today. Simona, Mariana, Angelique all refer to the circular economy. And reuse of water is part of that circular economy. And therefore, it is absolutely important that when we can do so, we reuse water, both in terms of irrigation, agriculture, urban waste, etc., because it is vital for us and we have to take care of it. A good proposal which Peter said we will be delighted to back.
Merci.
Thank you very much. So with that, we finish the Catch the Eye procedure. Mr. Villa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President, and once again I would like to congratulate the rapporteur, Bonafè, for her success in drafting this report and also welcome the support and the ideas put forward by the members of this House. The Commission has closely followed the discussion and will examine in detail the proposals of the European Parliament in view of the next steps in the legislative process. I would like to make, however, 2 or 3 points. With regards to the issue of polluted soil, we do have the Nitrate Directive to protect our soil, and the Commission is following the implementation of these directives very closely. It is, at least for me, very hard to justify or even to understand how bad agricultural practices are still harming the same resources that sustainable agriculture depends on. Another point that I would like to make is that I feel we are at times underestimating the problem when we say that the EU is facing water scarcity. It is the whole planet which is facing this problem, and this makes the necessity to act and this necessity to act now even more urgent. With regards to the scope of the proposed law, whether it's limited to agricultural irrigation, I would like to point out that of the various possible areas for water reuse, agricultural irrigation is the most widely used worldwide. As demonstrated in the impact assessment undertaken, water reuse for agricultural irrigation also has the great potential in the European Union, but is currently underutilised. While the Commission agrees on the desirability of using reclaimed water for other purposes, the proposed rules do not exclude the possibility for Member States to use reclaimed waters for other purposes as well. We are confident that an agreement on the new rules can be found and that it will be possible to swiftly complete the legislative process of this very important dossier. Once entered into force, the new instrument will facilitate the uptake of water reuse, contributing to fulfil the largely untapped potential of this practice and also to alleviate the pressure of abstraction on surface and groundwater bodies, with also benefits for the farmers, for the consumers and also for the industry. The Commission looks forward to the forthcoming negotiations and stands ready to support the co-legislators in this process. I count, as I have always done, on your support for the vote, and thank you once again for your commitment to this file. Thank you, Madam President.
Que se passe-t-il, Madame Ayala Sender?
Okay, Ms. Ayala-Sender, did you?
Président, je voudrais juste rappeler à M.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I was just wanting to know whether Mr. Vela would be able to tell us today when the directive on contaminated soils is going to be produced. It's another topic, I understand, but I would just like to know that, please.
La question, j'espère qu'il va pouvoir.
Okay, I hope he'll be able to give you a response, and I will pass the floor to you in a moment. Ms. Grappini, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. The Catch the Eye procedure has finished, and we will have your comments in writing, please. Mr. Vela, if you would be able to respond to that question, could you please do that now, and then we will conclude the debate with the rapporteur.
Monsieur Vela, êtes-vous d'accord pour...
Mr. Vela, would you agree to respond to Ms. Ayala-Sender's question? This is on the timetable, please.
My colleague has got a point. I think that there were various tentatives to reach some sort of proposal on the way forward. We have been discussing this possibility, but unfortunately so far we have not concluded. But I will promise that I will give it another try. But I think you are very right on this.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Bonafé, next, please.
Vous pouvez conclure. Si, grazie, Presidente.
Yes, thank you very much, President. Firstly, I wanted to thank the Commissioner, in fact, for his words on this topic. I have to say, today we've heard from him on this, but we've heard from him throughout his mandate on this topic, so thank you very much for that. And I'd also like to thank the colleagues who have spoken on this point and who have worked with me over the past few months. I think what we've heard today from colleagues shows that there is a very clear support, a very, maybe not unanimous, but very broad support for what we're discussing here. Everybody knows that water is a precious resource, incredibly precious, and we cannot waste even 1 cubic meter of it. It's good that we are looking at now at extending the circular economy model to water resources in Europe. And the principles of the circular economy, first and foremost, state that there need to be savings in the use of water, but also reuse. Reuse in agriculture and reuse for public civic uses as well. I'm thinking about street cleaning, for example, but also industrial uses. And obviously here we have to take into account the criteria for human health, and those would have to be respected. Facing climate change as we are at the moment, with determination, we are going to be able to combat some of the problems that we will face, and these will have very grave consequences for our economy as well. So we need very clear standards for water reuse as soon as possible, but we also need investment in the sector in order to ensure that the efficient use of water can become a reality. Thank you. Thank you very much. With that, the debate is closed and the vote will take place this afternoon. In fact, in about 13 minutes. We'll have a brief pause and take up again at 12:30. Thank you.